Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the workshop today. Today, we're going to be talking about anxiety and behavior in the classroom. We're going to be exploring just how anxiety shows up in students, how it can influence behavior, and most importantly, what can we do to respond in ways that are supportive and student-centered. My goal really is today to help you see behavior as communication and to give you the practical tools to respond with compassion and effectiveness. My name is Leslie Shu, and I am a registered provisional psychologist from Con Communication Services. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. So as I mentioned, these are our three main objectives. We want to recognize signs of anxiety, understand how anxiety influences behavior, and practical strategies for managing anxiety. By the end of today, I hope you'll feel confident, or at least more confident, recognizing these signs, understanding how it can drive behavior, and then applying these strategies in classrooms and homes to make them calmer and safer spaces for students. So to start, recognizing signs of anxiety. Well, what is anxiety? Well, anxiety itself isn't bad. It's actually our brain's way of keeping us safe from threat and harm and dangers. Think about a time maybe you crossed the street and suddenly a car came around the corner. Your heart probably jumped, maybe your muscles tensed, maybe you actually even stepped back a little bit. So that was anxiety doing its job. It was alerting you to the fact that there was danger and helping you survive. And so, at its core, anxiety can be a healthy protective response. Without it, we actually are not quick to respond to any kind of threat or danger. But when anxiety becomes too strong, too frequent, or out of proportion, this is when we start to see it impacting school, social, work life, etc. For children and teens, this can look like a student who refuses to go to school because they're worried about something bad happening, either to them or at the school. It can be a student who cries before every test, even though they've studied and they say they know the material. It can also be a teen who avoids their friends and various social activities because they're scared of being judged by them. And so, in those moments, anxiety actually stops becoming protective and instead becomes a barrier. So, it pulls kids and students away from learning, friendships, and opportunities to grow. When we talk about anxiety, it does include the physical, emotional, and cognitive symptoms, because anxiety activates multiple systems in the body. So we actually often think of anxiety as just worry, but it's actually much more complex and it's a full body experience. Let's break this down a little bit. So physically, you might see that students and kids are going to complain about stomach aches, headaches, nausea, their heart might be racing, they might feel dizzy or sweaty, they might actually be very tired because anxiety is very draining. So, for example, think of maybe a student who regularly visits the nurse's room or the doctor's room with no medical explanation. Emotionally, anxiety doesn't always have to show up as fear. For some students, it can be irritability, frustration, being very tearful. Think of maybe a student who just lashed out on its group members when it was time to present. Underneath, they might actually be feeling anxious. Cognitively, we know that anxiety impacts our thinking. So, kids may have racing thoughts, difficulties focusing, or even persistent negative self talk. So, talking about themselves in a very negative way. Think of a student who says, "Oh, I'll just fail anyways," without actually trying. And so they've given up before they try. And it is important to remember that adults often only see the surface behavior. So what's going on the outside? The tantrum, the avoidance, the defiance. What's actually happening underneath may be anxiety activating all three systems at once. And so when these responses are frequent and they impair functioning, we move from what we call a normal worry into an anxiety disorder. Every child and adult and individual worries sometimes. They worry about their friends, they worry about their grades, they worry about being safe. But when the worry is constant, intense, and starts to interfere with their school life, their social life, or even their family functioning, we start to move into the realm of could this be an anxiety disorder? So the key markers here are frequency, how often it's happening, intensity, How overwhelming does the distress feel? And impairment, does it get in the way of daily life? For example, it's very normal to feel nervous before a spelling test. However, if that turns into having panic attacks every morning before school, that's more than just what we would call normal nervousness. Another note, too, is anxiety disorders are actually among the most commonly diagnosed mental health condition in children and youth. Research actually shows that between 1 in 8 and 1 in 5 young people experience an anxiety disorder. So that means and this is a little bit of in some older research, but typical classroom of 25, which we know may not be typical, you're seeing about 3 to 5 students likely struggling with anxiety that impacts their learning. The good news is that anxiety is also one of the most treatable mental health conditions when it's recognized early and supported well. Teachers, parents, caregivers, school staff, service providers play a critical role in noticing the signs and then providing the right response. So, what are some signs of anxiety? Of course, this list is not exhaustive, but I just wanted to focus on some of the things that you might see. So we might see social withdrawal, pulling away from their friends, not wanting to spend time with their friends, not hanging out with their typical peer group, sitting alone. Avoidance, so this can be avoiding tasks, avoiding people. An excessive need for reassurance. So always needing someone to tell them that they're safe, always asking if things are going to be okay. Sometimes this might even look like a child asking the other parent, when will you be home? Will you be home today? We might see things like somatic complaints, so the stomach aches, headaches, muscle tension, dizziness, nausea. You might also notice that the child always complains of certain symptoms, maybe before school or before certain stressful events. We might see sleep disturbances, so this can include trouble falling asleep, having nightmares, night terrors, waking up in the middle of the night, not being able to fall asleep, or even sleeping too much. We might see inattention and poor concentration. When it comes to perfectionism, a child who strives for perfection and who actually becomes overly upset by mistakes or failure may actually be struggling with anxiety. We might see, school absence or declining school performance. So they may refuse to go to school, they may refuse to do their schoolwork, complaints about feeling sick right before they have to go to school, even becoming overly worried about assignments and exams and then avoiding doing them. They may become easily distressed. In some severe cases of anxiety, we actually see panic attacks. And so these are intense episodes of fear or discomfort. They typically come on very suddenly, and symptoms include, a rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, chest pain, dizziness, shaking. Sometimes people say, like, I think I'm going crazy. Sometimes people might, they hold their heart and they say, I think I'm having a heart attack. And so we also might see emotional outbursts. So crying, anger, frustration over maybe small things. So we kind of say it seems disproportionate to what's going on. And we might see low confidence or even lacking confidence. So they're struggling with self-doubt, insecurity about abilities, and they might again give up easily or avoid challenges. The other thing to keep in mind is developmental presentation. So anxiety doesn't look the same at every age. It changes and shifts as children grow, and it often hides behind behavior. And so it's important because some behaviors we may see in young children that are very normal, but we might not think it's as normal when maybe a 17-year-old displays those types of behaviors. So, just kind of again, some common behaviors and symptoms that you might see. So, in young children, you might see clinginess, crying, somatic complaints, so stomach aches, headaches. At this age, they typically cannot yet verbalize their worry. So, it typically comes out in a behavior or a body symptom. So, a kid who's always saying, oh, I have a tummy ache every morning before preschool. In middle childhood, we have students who are now a bit more aware of their performance. So when it comes to things like perfectionism, test anxiety, school refusal, this is where anxiety really begins to interfere with learning and attendance. In adolescence, this may look like withdrawal, irritability, panic, or even what we call risky coping strategies. So this might be substance use, self-harm, avoidance, risky, risk-taking behaviors as well. A lot of these problems are often mistaken as attitude problems, and so we want to kind of make sure we distinguish that. So a teen who maybe lashes out and gets into a fight with a friend before a party may actually be panicking about peer judgment. And so when we recognize different developmental differences, we can respond with more empathy. A stomachache in a 6-year-old, perfectionism in a 10-year-old, irritability in a 15-year-old may all be anxiety, just wearing different masks. So when do we start looking and putting information together about, is it more concerning? Should we be a little bit more on the lookout, and why? So to start, I want to talk about the why. So why do we look for patterns? Why do we try to differentiate? Well, it helps us actually understand that anxiety is different than just being defiant. And that prevents us actually from mislabeling our kids and our students. So a child who avoids their work might look lazy, or someone who blurts out their answers may seem impulsive, but maybe if we step back and notice the patterns, we might actually quickly realize that the behavior is actually anxiety driven. And so reframing is very important. And I know this can be so difficult when we might have so many students in our class or so many people that we need to support, but it really does change how we respond and provide support. It brings empathy instead of frustration, and it helps us guide in knowing when to refer for more support. So to start, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for it across settings. We want to see symptoms at home, we want to see symptoms at school, and maybe in any other extracurriculars across time. So we're not just looking at a few bad days or, something has happened, an individual in their family has passed away, maybe their dog ran away. We're not just looking for a few bad days. We're looking for persistency across weeks or even months. So we want to make sure that it's not better explained by a medical cause, so not caused by an illness or an injury. I always say it's very, very, very important that we ensure that our kids see a doctor or some sort of medical professional before exploring any possibility of anxiety. And the reason for that is because we actually know that there are several physical causes that can present as anxiety, but in reality, they're related to an underlying physical cause. For example, low iron or issues with a thyroid can actually lead to or make symptoms of anxiety worse. And the last thing that we're looking for is something called functional impairment. So this means that the symptoms a child is experiencing really interferes with either their learning, friendships, relationships with their parents, or just day-to-day tasks. And so how does anxiety influence behavior? To start, let's talk about internalizing behaviors. So, this is when students turn their distress inwards rather than showing it outwardly. So, these are not going to be acting out behaviors. They may withdraw, stay quiet, become overly compliant. So, on the surface, these kids often can actually look like model students. They don't cause disruptions, they follow the rules, and sometimes they actually even appear very high achieving academically. And for this reason, internalizing behaviors are often missed. So the research shows that teachers and school staff are much more likely to notice externalizing behaviors because those behaviors directly disrupt the classroom and they demand typically immediate attention. And so the important part here is to remember internalizing doesn't mean the kid is doing well. So they may still be carrying those intense feelings of anxiety, sadness, or fear, but they're keeping it hidden. So they're not disruptive and they can often just slip under the radar until something significant happens. Suddenly, a panic attack in class, immediate school refusal, a noticeable drop in grades. So I do encourage you to look beyond good behavior. Maybe a child who never raises their hand, they avoid eye contact, they're quietly avoiding group work, they may actually be struggling silently. And so some patterns to watch for here include, students who consistently maybe avoid challenges or they give up easily, maybe those who withdraw from their peers or seem quite socially isolated, and kids who strive for perfection at all costs, redoing their work, erasing until the page tears, getting really distressed over small mistakes or corrections and feedback. And so these signs, they're subtle, but they point to a student who's carrying a very heavy emotional burden at times. And so the research reminds us that students with internalizing difficulties are just as at risk for poor academic and mental health outcomes when their needs go unnoticed. So our role is to stay curious, look beneath the surface, and make space for kids whose struggles may not be loud, but they're just as real. Now, when we talk about externalizing behaviors, those are the opposite of internalizing. So instead of turning their distress inwards, they express it outwardly. These are kids who show their anxiety in ways that may seem disruptive, angry, or non-compliant. In the classroom, this typically can look like things like yelling, refusing to work, throwing materials, storming out of the room. And on the surface, it can actually still seem defiant, disrespectful, or even laziness. But underneath, these outbursts are often just expressions of anxiety or being very overwhelmed. Think of a student who rips up their worksheet, right? They're like, and they tear it in half. It may look like they don't care. But if we look closer, what might actually be happening is fear. Fear of making a mistake, fear of embarrassment, fear of failing in front of their peers. Maybe the tearing of the paper was actually a way to release some intense internal pressure. And so the big risk here for externalizing behaviors is misinterpretation. Externalizing students are far more likely to receive discipline as opposed to support. So they may be sent to the office, they may lose recess, they may have suspensions, expulsions. Although these consequences might stop some of the behavior in the short term, they don't actually address the root cause. In fact, they can actually often escalate anxiety, reinforce shame, and then strengthen that cycle of needing to act out. So when we recognize that this kind of behavior can actually be a stress response, it shifts how we respond. Instead of punishment, what many of these students actually need is co-regulation and emotional safety. Maybe an adult who can see past the behavior and respond to the underlying need. We're still not excusing harmful behavior, but it just means that we're approaching it with a bit more empathy, compassion, and skill rather than only disciplinary action. And research does support this. So they have found that externalizing behaviors, things like defiance, aggression, disruption, they're often driven by the same type of anxiety and stress that we see in internalizers. They're just expressing it outwardly. And there is an emphasis that while these kids are often punished, what they need is again that regulation, teaching them the coping skills and safe relationships. And so here, behavior is communication. For some students, anxiety hides quietly in perfectionism or withdrawal. For others, anxiety shouts loudly through defiance or disruption. Either way, the message is the same. The child is struggling, and our job is to listen to the behavior. And so, as I just mentioned, behavior is communication. All behavior has a function, all behavior has a purpose. One of the most powerful shifts we can make as educators, support staff, service providers, parents, caregivers is to see behavior as a form of communication. Children rarely act just because every behavior has a purpose, even if it doesn't make sense at first glance. For example, a student may refuse to start an assignment. The first assumption is they just don't want to do it. But maybe it's a fear of failure. Maybe they're just overwhelmed by the task. Maybe a student who yells during transitions, they're not trying to cause trouble. Maybe the outburst is a way of saying, hey, change feels really scary and unpredictable for me. So when we pause and ask ourselves, what is this child trying to tell me through their behavior? It shifts our perspective. That simple move from basically judgment to just being curious changes how we respond. And so we start to look for the unmet need that's underneath, as opposed to just giving them a label of disrespectful, non-compliant, so on. And so schools, when they treat behavior as communication, there is some research here that actually says that overall discipline problems go down and student engagement goes up. And so students feel understood, which make them more likely to regulate, re-engage, and then learn in school. So behavior is a message. It's telling us about what the child needs. Our job is to listen to hear those needs. So I always like to talk about the brain and how it impacts these things. You might be wondering, Why do we need to know about the brain? We are not neuroscientists. Well, the reason is that having just even a simple way of understanding how the brain works really helps us shift from seeing behavior as just intentional misbehavior to recognizing as a legitimate stress response. So when a child's prefrontal cortex, this is that front part of the brain right behind our forehead, it's actually responsible for things like thinking, learning, problem solving. It shuts down under anxiety. It changes our expectations. And so we can then ask, what can I do to help this child's brain feel safe enough to learn again? And so understanding the brain doesn't just add a science component, it adds empathy. And it gives us permission to respond with patience. So when a child is anxious, their brain can, there's a saying called flip its lid. Okay. This is a phrase that Dr. Dan Siegel uses in his well-known video. I really recommend it if you haven't watched it, and you might just, even this signal alone might show you. So it's the flipping of the lid. And so essentially what he talks about is that anxiety takes over and the logical problem-solving part of the brain goes offline. And so here's essentially a shorter version of what happens. The amygdala, which is part of the brain, it's kind of like the brain's alarm system. Its goal is to sense danger. And so sometimes the danger is real, like earlier I said, almost stepping into traffic, and sometimes it's only perceived, worrying about having to read out loud in front of the class. Either way, when a danger is real or perceived, the amygdala sends out what we call a red alert, and it floods the body with stress chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol. What the brain is starting to do is it's preparing the child for survival. The brain is basically saying something is not safe. You need to either fight, flight, which is run, or freeze. And these responses are hardwired into every single human. They're automatic. The child does not choose this. The moment the brain goes into survival mode, it's no longer a choice. So fight might look like lashing out, yelling, arguing with the teacher. Flight might look like bolting from the room, asking to go see the nurse's room, going to sit in the office. Freeze may look like shutting down, staring blankly at the sheet in front of them, or just even refusing to speak. In a classroom, these responses can seem quite confusing. Teachers might think that kids are not paying attention, they're acting out, but in reality, the child's nervous system is just completely overwhelmed. And the body is doing what it's designed to do, trying to keep them safe. So it is so important to remember these are not conscious choices that the child is making. Just like how you don't choose when your heart races really quickly when you hear a loud bang, kids don't choose these reactions either. Their brains and their bodies are just acting automatically to what they think is a danger or threat. So when we see these behaviors, we don't ask what's wrong with this child. We ask what's happening in their brain and body right now. This can help us understand what regulation do they need to get them back online. It's why telling a student to just calm down or just focus doesn't work. Their thinking brain is essentially temporarily offline. They cannot access any logic, any problem solving, any way to even calm down until they feel safe again. And so that's our job. It's not discipline. The first thing to do is it's helping them recognize so they can get to a safe state where they can become back more online. So here's what it can look like in the classroom. So when a child's alarm system is switched on, that again, part of their front part of their brain, prefrontal cortex, it's gone, it's offline. It's why we cannot just tell them to think logically on command. It also means that the skills we value the most in school, memory, attention, problem solving, very much disrupted by anxiety. It's why you might see a student who aces their homework but completely freezes during a test. Or this is why maybe when they're suddenly in an assembly, instead of reading next block, a student just explodes. So anxious students are in survival mode. They're not refusing to learn. They're just temporarily unable to access their thinking brain, which is the brain that they need when it comes to school. I just want to show you some more kind of real classroom examples that you might see. So you might see a student who refuses to do group work, and it may look oppositional, but maybe what's actually going on is social anxiety. They have a deep fear of being judged or feeling very embarrassed in front of their peers. A child who's constantly reassurance seeking and asking the same question, they're not trying to frustrate you. They're seeking reassurance because uncertainty in their world feels unsafe. A student who maybe lashes out during transitions, they're not maybe angry at you, they're just overwhelmed by the unpredictability, the noise, or even sensory overload. We've talked about perfectionism, so that fear of making mistakes or disappointing others, and school refusal, right? We might see students who are labeled as non-compliant, but what actually ends up happening is the avoidance is linked and frequently driven by worry, panic attacks, or even peer-related fears. And so, what actually ties all of this together is that behavior is protective. So, these are coping mechanisms to these children, which is ways that they're trying to manage their anxiety on their own. Even if the strategies sometimes feel disruptive or ineffective, this is what they've learned on their own. And so, instead of again that punishment, because that reinforces fear, we need to step in with support. This helps them feel safe. So let's get into some practical strategies and things that you can do. So these are things that can be done in the classroom, at home, in any kind of capacity. I've just kind of put in some universal classroom strategies because these are things that can help with every student, not just individuals with anxiety. Think of these as, as the foundation for an emotionally safe classroom. Kids don't need a diagnosis, they don't have to single out. Instead, it just creates conditions where all students can learn with a little bit less stress. So, predictable routines. Predictability reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is, as we mentioned, what often fuels anxiety. So, when students know what's coming next, their nervous systems can learn to relax. This can look as something as simple as starting the day with a morning check in using a visual schedule that stays posted all day. Maybe it's giving some countdowns before transitions, 5 more minutes, and then we're going to switch our activity. Even older students benefit from routines because it lowers the mental load of constantly guessing what's next. Clear structure and expectations. So, anxiety thrives and feeds in ambiguous situations. So, when expectations are unclear, students with anxiety will often go to the worst case scenario. That is where their brain goes. So, posting classroom rules in a very visual way, modeling what success looks like, breaking instructions into smaller steps can actually go a long way. For example, instead of saying finish your paragraph, say step 1, write your topic sentence. Step 2, add 2 detail sentences. Step 3, write a closing sentence. That level of clarity builds confidence and reduces the chances of students just shutting down in the class. Of course, calm tone and modeling regulation. Students borrow from our calm. So your voice, your tone, your facial expressions, your body languages sets the emotional climate of the room. If you stay steady, even during those moments of disruption, students feel safe. And so the powerful tool that I like to talk about is modeling regulation out loud. So saying things like, I'm going to take a slow breath before we start. Show students what calm down strategies look like in real time. Emotional check-ins. So giving students actually a way to share how they're actually feeling normalizes emotions and provides valuable information to you in the classroom. So tools like mood meters, color cards, or even a simple thumbs up, sideways, down, they're simple, but they're effective. They're also very quick. So a student who maybe kind of has a thumb here, what they're telling you is they're maybe a bit on edge, but they don't have to say it out loud. So this creates opportunities for you to put in support before the behavior escalates. Next, we have relationship building. So relationships are one of the strongest protective factors for mental health in general. Greeting students by name, noticing a small positive, making daily connections. Even a quick 1 to 2 minute positive interaction each day, ask them how their soccer game went. Oh, you got a new backpack, can build a sense of safety and belonging. When students feel known, they're more likely to actually take academic risks and less likely to spiral into that anxiety. And lastly, teacher presence. Never underestimate your own presence, right? So as I mentioned, your calm tone, your body language, your predictability, these are powerful signals of safety. In fact, research actually on trauma and anxiety informed classrooms consistently show that these things, predictable routine, clarity, adult calmness, are some of the strongest protective factors for student mental health overall. So the good news is that pretty much none of these strategies typically take extra time. They're not separate interventions. They're woven into a lot of the things that you're probably already doing in your day-to-day in your classroom. Next, I want to talk a little bit about individual supports. So, some students who struggle with anxiety might need more than just the universal classroom supports. They need targeted strategies to feel safe and experience success. Again, these are just small shifts that can make a big difference without adding too much work. So, this can be things like offering choices for autonomy. Anxiety often comes from feeling very powerless. Kids feel small, they feel unheard, and so even any type of small choice can give a child a sense of control. For example, you can ask them, would you like to write with pen or pencil today? Would you like to use the green pencil or the yellow pencil? Do you want to present in spot number 3 or in spot number 7? These choices are very simple, but what they send the message to the brain about is they say, you have some control here, and that alone can lower stress. Scaffolding difficulty tasks is really important, so large assignments can feel very overwhelming. Breaking them down into smaller steps actually helps kids see their progress and build confidence. So each small success builds onto that confidence, which reduces the chance of a student shutting down. So, yes, we can tell a student, write an essay. But if that feels like a lot, you can say, okay, I want you to brainstorm 3 ideas, write a topic sentence, and then draft the first paragraph. And then they can come check in with you when they've done each step. Teaching coping skills explicitly. So, skills like slow breathing, grounding, positive self talk, they are not intuitive. Students need to be taught them, modeled them, and then practice them. Think of it like times tables. We don't just expect kids to use them and do math minutes under pressure the first time they learn it. Coping skills work the same way. We teach it in calm moments so that they're available to them in the stressful moments. We also want to look at flexible accommodations. So some students may need quiet spaces for tests, they might need extra times, or alternative ways of assessment. And these are not what we call special treatment. They're actually tools to level the playing field so that anxiety doesn't block their performance. And of course, collaborating with support staff and families. So, working with counselors, psychologists, parents, caregivers, any adults and staff in their life for consistency. If a student maybe uses a breathing exercise at home, reinforce it by reminding them to use it in the classroom. A shared approach always makes strategies more effective and easier for kids to practice and learn. And so sometimes we need to combine universal supports with individual strategies. This creates classrooms for all students to do well. Again, we're not lowering their expectations, we're just giving them the tools to meet these expectations in a way that's successful. So now I'd actually like to go into some very specific strategies and tools, explain what they are, how to use them, and what this might look like in the classroom or even at home. So to start, we have a calm down corner. So this is essentially a designated space in the room or the school or the home where a student and child can go to regulate. It can be called lots of different things. A calm corner, a reset room, a reset spot, whatever you or the child decides what it's called. The goal is to provide a safe and supportive space for a student to step away, to pause, regulate, and then return to learning when they're ready. What is very, very important about this is how we frame it. It is not a punishment and it's not a timeout. Instead, it's a tool. It is a tool for self regulation, just like a pencil is a tool for writing. When students know that the space is there to help them, as opposed to excluding them or singling them out, they're more likely to use it in a way that's effective. So, what might these spaces look like? Well, we can have some comfortable seating, maybe a beanbag chair, a small rug, even a cushion to lay on to signal relaxation. It might look like sensory tools. So, noise canceling headphones, a stress ball, some fidget tools, even putty or Play Doh to help release tension. There might be some visual aids, so maybe a sand timer, a visual timer. This actually gives students their own ability to monitor their reset time. It's actually very helpful to start helping kids understand the idea of self-soothing. There might actually be some calming activities there. So some coloring sheets, some mindfulness cards, even a feeling chart just to help kids name what they're experiencing. And sometimes it might be even an optional choice to have like a privacy divider. So a small divider or even maybe a bookshelf nearby can make the space feel a little bit more separate, but still supervised. And so when students feel overwhelmed, as I mentioned, their nervous systems go right into this fight, flight, or freeze response. Expecting them to just get back to work without any regulation is like expecting a car to drive on an empty tank. So, a calm space or a calm down corner or a safe space provides the fuel that they need to be able to reset. This can be for the whole classroom as well. Or, it doesn't have to just be for the student who's experiencing anxiety. Children who have the tools to calm down are just less likely to disrupt peers in general. And so, what this space signals is it's okay to take a break. You're safe to do that here, and we're going to work through it together. We also have fidget tools. So stress balls, putty, textured objects, tangle toys, even things like a smooth rock. So they help because they give students a safe outlet for some restless energy. It also helps them self-regulate without disrupting the class. They do provide sensory input so that calms the nervous system and it helps to improve focus. The key here is normalizing these items in the classroom as focus tools, not toys. And I know that that is such a small shift, but that framing matters. If they're treated like toys, students are going to play with them. If they're introduced as tools, students learn that they have a purpose. So set clear expectations right from the start. Tools shouldn't be used quietly. They should be used in ways that don't distract others. They're specifically to help with focus and regulation. They're not for playing, they're not to pass around the classroom from desk to desk. And so, we can demonstrate what does appropriate use look like. For example, you can show the students, oh, this is how I'm going to squeeze and use a stress ball underneath my desk while listening, right? Not throwing it around, throwing it to the person across the classroom. It also can give students language. So you can say things like, this is your tool to help your brain stay calm and focused. If it starts to distract you or anyone else, we have to put it away and try again later. When we set the tone, you create the environment where fidget tools are used as focus tools, and they're not privileges, rewards, or toys. Next, we have visual schedules. So anxiety often spikes when kids don't know what's coming next. And so again, the uncertainty feels overwhelming, especially for students who are already on edge. Clear visuals and structured routines take away some of that uncertainty. So you can post daily agendas. You can write the day's plan on the board. It projects the students and gives them a bit of a roadmap. And even if the plans change, they can see the outline and you can, erase it and put in a new item. What this does is it reassures students that there's going to be a plan and they're not going to be caught off guard. For older students in junior high or even high school, what visual schedules can look like is maybe like main topics of the day or what homework will be assigned on the board or even providing that in Google Classrooms. And then going through it every day with students or every week can be very helpful. Transition countdowns, so shifting between activities, are often high stress moments for kids with anxiety. So a simple verbal or visual cue like 5 more minutes before we clean up, 2 more minutes, 1 more minute. This allows the brain to prepare for change instead of a sudden jolt. A first then chart, so these are especially helpful for younger students or those who might need extra clarity. So it shows what needs to be done and then what comes after. So for example, first finish your worksheet, then computer lab time. This just makes tasks feel manageable and gives a sense of reward and predictability. So together, these tools lower stress because they make the classroom more predictable. When students know what to expect, they don't have to waste their mental energy worrying about surprises. They can actually focus on learning instead. Next, we have grounding techniques. One of the most powerful and effective grounding tools is called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 strategy. This is a sensory exercise, and it helps bring kids back to ground them back in the present moment. When a child is caught in their thoughts of anxiety and they're spiraling, worrying about the future, replaying mistakes, imagining worst case scenarios, imagining all the what if scenarios, their brain is stuck in a threat mode. What 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 does is it brings the attention away from those racing thoughts and back to the body. Because you can't be thinking about something and then worrying about anxious thoughts at the same time. So here's how it works. You can ask the student to notice 5 things that they see, 4 things that they can touch, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing they can taste. It can be done silently, without drawing attention, and in almost any setting, at a desk, in a hallway, at recess, in the classroom. It takes less than a minute, but it helps shift and reframe their focus from panic to being present. You probably are going to want to guide it out loud the first few times, but lots of students can learn this quickly and independently when they notice their anxiety is building with just some small reminders. Another simple but powerful tool is deep breathing. It almost sounds too basic, but controlled breathing is one of the fastest ways to calm down the nervous system. So when we take slow, steady breaths, it activates the body's parasympathetic nervous system. This is essentially the built-in calm down system that we all have in our body. It lowers heart rates, it relaxes the muscle, and it sends a signal to the brain, hey, you're safe, you can relax right now. In moments of stress, their body is in fight, flight, freeze, preparing to essentially defend against danger. Deep breathing is like pressing the reset button. It shifts them back towards balance and regulation. We need to remember that this needs to be practiced, taught, and modeled when they are calm. When they're in stressful moments, that is not the time to teach them these strategies. They are offline, they are not in thinking brain mode. Some other examples for deep breathing in particular is, the hand tracing technique. So students basically trace on their hand with the finger of the other hand. They basically breathe in, breathe out, and they trace their fingers as they go up and down each finger, breathing in and breathing out. It gives them a bit of a concrete physical anchor for their breathing. It can also be things like box breathing. So having children essentially draw a box on their hand, in their palm, and breathe with it. So they breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, and out. Again, giving them something just tangible and a physical anchor. For younger children, we might do things like we blow bubbles or we blow on pinwheels. This is another way to practice deep breathing in a really playful way. Older students sometimes might actually just connect with the idea of the breath with numbers. So you inhale for 4 and you kind of count, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you hold for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. These strategies might seem small, but they're powerful. A student who knows how to ground themselves with some quick sensory scans or resetting with a few deep breaths is better equipped to actually ride out their anxiety and then re-engage in learning. And the beautiful part about this is that these are skills that all students and adults can benefit from. Here's another example of when students are feeling dysregulated and a concrete way for them to focus on this rather than their thoughts. So this one in particular it says sync your breathing with this. So it's for deep breathing and you have them breathe in, and when the image reaches the top and starts to go down, they breathe out. So this is even something really great that you can put in the board in the morning or right before they go to lunch or right when they come back for lunch to get all students ready for the day. You can Google these. You can basically just look up like breathing GIFs, syncing breathing images. Next, we have something called a worry box. So again, a very simple but powerful strategy. What it does is it gives students a place to write down and put their worries, and it's in a designated spot. So the idea is that a student can write down what's on their mind, maybe a test coming up, a fight with a friend, even something maybe they can't name, and then drop that worry into the box. In doing so, the worry becomes what we call externalized. So instead of having it in their head swirling around, taking up mental space all day long, it's stored somewhere safe on the outside until it can be revisited. For younger kids, this might be drawing a picture instead of writing words. For older kids, it could just be jotting down a quick sentence on a slip of paper. Teachers can decide whether the worry box is, private or something that they review with the student later. So this strategy in particular helps to reduce rumination. Writing it down frees up brain space so that students can focus on learning. It validates emotions, and the message then becomes, oh, your worries matter. But you don't have to carry them alone, and you also don't have to carry them all at once. Sometimes just knowing that a worry box exists can lower anxiety because students can trust that there's a place for their big feelings. So some practical ways of how we can use this is introduce it as a normal classroom tool, not just for big problems, but for any worry that feels distracting in class. You can set clear guidelines around it. Students can use it at the start of the day, after lunch, or during maybe transition so it doesn't disrupt instruction. And then you can decide how the worries will be handled. Maybe some are private, others are checked in on by the teacher, or even a counselor if the student wants support. We talk about a feelings thermometer, aka also known as, zones of regulation. They're simple tools that give students a visual language for their emotion. So a feelings thermometer uses colors or numbers to show the intensity of an emotion. For example, green could be I'm calm, I'm ready to learn. Yellow could be, oh, I'm a little worried and I'm feeling a little unsettled today. Red signals I'm overwhelmed, I am not feeling good today. You can also add blue for, oh, I'm feeling really tired and sad today. A 1 to 5 scale actually works the same way. 1 is I'm very calm. 3 is I'm starting to feel a little bit worried. 5 is my body and brain feels out of control. And so the zones of regulation expands on this. So the blue zone is low energy. I'm tired. I'm bored. I'm sad. Green zone is I'm calm. I'm focused. I'm ready to learn. I'm happy. Yellow can be I'm heightened. So I'm a little anxious. Maybe I feel really silly in my body. I feel frustrated. And the red zone can say I'm angry. I'm scared. I'm out of control. So these visuals are flexible. They can be on a wall, they can be just little desk cards, they can even be adapted into digital tools. And so for many children, especially younger students or those with limited language skills, it's very, very hard to put emotion into words. So what the chart does is it gives them a nonverbal, low pressure way to communicate how they're actually doing. Instead of bottling things up until they explode, students can point to a color or a number that reflects their state. This can also help teachers and parents. Instead of guessing where they're at, they actually get a very quick snapshot of the child's emotional state and then how to respond. So how can we use this? It can be a routine check-in. Maybe at Morning Circle, students can place a clip or a magnet on the chart to show how they're feeling. This helps teachers identify maybe who might need a little bit of extra support that day. Maybe it's a midday reset, so a quick check-in after lunch or before a big transition can help prevent any issues. Or maybe it's individual use. Maybe students keep a small version at their desk or even on their binder, pointing to a zone as they are struggling. The key here again is consistency. Make it part of the daily rhythm and routine so it feels normal and safe. It's not something that signals out, only this one kid has to do it every single day. Over time, it actually helps kids not only build self-awareness, but emotional vocabulary for how they're doing. They're learning to connect certain cues with zones and numbers. So feeling thermometers and zones of regulations help students monitor themselves. So they notice when they're going from green to yellow, and it actually maybe gives them a chance to use some of the other coping tools before they hit red. We also have journal and doodle books. So a small notebook for free writing, drawing, or jotting down worries provides just a private outlet to externalize their worries and reduce the rumination. And so research has shown that some expressive writing can actually help regulate emotions and improves coping. So you can offer this as an option during their calm down time or even as part of their daily reflection or as they copy down things into their agenda. So avoiding power struggles. When students push back, it's easy to get pulled into a power struggle, but escalation only makes anxiety feel worse. The first step is a mindset shift. Don't take the behavior personally. What looks like defiance is often distress. A student who refuses to work may not be trying to challenge you, they may just be overwhelmed and scared of failing. And so, practically, this means three things. Validate first. Acknowledge the feeling before addressing the behavior. You know, I can see this feels very overwhelming for you. That alone really just lowers a student's defenses as compared to saying, you are talking out of turn again. As humans, we are wired to be automatically defensive. And so when we hear someone say, you did this and you did that and you did this, it is so hard not to be defensive. But saying something from our own perspective, I can see that this feels very overwhelming. It just helps shift that perspective. So redirect calmly. So offer that clear structure or simple choice. So instead of do this now, say, would you like to start with question 1 or would you like to start on page 2? This just gives a bit of control and just to reduce the anxiety in the situation. And then revisit later. So as I mentioned, the teaching moment comes after regulation, not during. Once the student is calm, you can talk through expectations and problem solve together. When we talk about power struggles, we're not excusing any behavior. We're just addressing it at the right time. So sometimes parents, teachers, caregivers, service providers ask me, when do I refer or when does this go beyond the classroom and the home environment? So as I mentioned, a lot of, mild and low anxiety can be supported in the classroom and at home with several of the strategies we discussed. But there are times that referral is needed. So if anxiety is presenting as very persistent and constantly interfering with learning, if you see frequent physical complaints without any medical cause, or if the child is experiencing panic attacks or withdrawing from others, peers, activities, this is typically time to seek additional help. This might be through a school counselor, an admin team, or any other mental health supports. An urgent red flag, though, is any mention of self-harm or hopelessness or suicide. So anything that falls in the line of, I want to hurt myself, I don't want to live anymore, this world would be better without me, everything feels bad, like I want to die. This typically will require an immediate referral to either a school psychologist, counselor, mental health team, and of course, alerting parents. So remember, your job is not to diagnose, it's just to notice the patterns and connect students to the right support. Often, teachers, parents, caregivers, support staff, service providers, you're the first ones to see these patterns and these behaviors. And so your referral then makes the difference. And of course, collaboration. So families are essential partners. So are schools. Anxiety often shows up differently at home than it does at school. So a child who might look calm in class might come home and fall apart, vice versa. So when we share observations, you get a fuller picture that helps everyone. And so the tone of communication also matters. When we're talking to families, we have to approach them with curiosity and partnership. We cannot approach them with blame or judgment. That is going to shut off again, that defensive mechanism kicks in. And consistency is very powerful. So if students know that you're having aligned strategies across the home and school environment, it reinforces safety. It's why documentation is also very important. Keeping notes on dates, triggers, and how student responds to different things can actually provide specialists with concrete data that will guide next steps. And so we want to build a team approach. It's families, educators, service providers, everyone working together as a team to create a safety net. And so, as a summary and takeaway of the presentation today, we've seen that anxiety shows up in many different ways. Sometimes it's quiet and hidden, other times it's loud and disruptive. What is important to remember is that behavior is always communication. Whether we see withdrawal, perfectionism, defiance, or outbursts, it is not just simply misbehavior, it's a message. And the question we ask is, what is the child trying to tell us? As adults, we play a critical role as co-regulators. Students borrow our calm, So when we respond with steadiness, empathy, structure, we're not just helping them manage anxiety in that moment, we're actually teaching them long-term skills. Relationships are protective, so strong relationships are at the heart of this work. A student who feels seen, safe, learns better, connects more, and is more willing to take healthy risks. Relationships don't just feel good, they actually are protecting, and they're protective factors against anxiety and stress. It can be as simple as greeting a child by their name in the morning and noticing something small about their effort. And so the message I want to leave here is your support matters. Even small shifts in how you respond to all students can transform a school experience. And so all the strategies we discussed today are meant to be practical, but also simple. Given that there's so much to do every single day in the classroom and in the home, these don't have to be done exactly how I've explained them. The purpose is find what works for you, your students, your classroom, your home, and what is possible within that realm. Every strategy we've discussed today, from universal supports all the way through to targeted tools, is just teaching and telling the kids and the student, you are safe, you are capable, and you are not alone. Thank you so much for attending the workshop today. Just as a final note, if you would like a summary handout for this presentation, we ask that you email this email on screen here, workshop@con-services.com, and it will take you to just a very short survey. Once you complete the survey, you will receive a link for the handout for this presentation. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.